In this video, I'm going to show you a basic perm wrap, also known as a crokinole technique. There's a couple of tricks that I do with the sectioning, and I'm going to show them to you now, because if you get your sectioning right, then the rods just fall into place. Take your rod and put it right at the center of the forehead. Basically, you're going to go center eye to center eye, or just put the rod right in the center of the nose. This is going to be the size of your section for this middle section that you're going to do down the back of the head. So this section runs all the way from the front all the way down to the nape. The other thing I do is on the sides, and the sides is somewhere where we tend to have a lot of issue getting the size of the section right. I'm going to show you the way not to do it first, and then I'm going to show you the way to do it. All the sectioning that we do, it starts at the apex, it goes to the top of the ear, not for a perm wrap. When you do that, apex, top of the ear, I have this section and I have this section. This top rod that I'm gonna have to put in here, this section now is way too big to accommodate that rod. When we get midway through this section, this is actually too wide for the rod. So here's what I do as a little trick. I actually make my section a slight diagonal. So I'm going to take a slight diagonal. It doesn't have to be really big, but just a slight diagonal until I hit right here by the ear. Now, what's going to happen? My rod is going to fit nicely in here. And I've narrowed out this section through here a little bit, and it's going to accommodate my rod through there. When you do a perm wrap, the hair needs to be wet, not damp, not dry. It needs to be wet. The wetter the hair is, the better it's going to stretch for you. The more stretch you get, the tighter, the more tension is going to be on that rod, which is going to give you a better end result. You always want to stand directly in front of the section that you're working on. When I do most perm wraps, I usually do the first couple of rods, I wrap them forward or toward the face. Then I switch and then I wrap the rest of them back. This is because a lot of people do have a fringe, and having it go in the direction that that fringe is going to fall just makes sense. The rods also stay better, so they're not going to droop and fall off. So I'm going to take my first section, which is right here at the front. Now your first section is going to be the trickiest because it's right at your hairline. And because it's right at your hairline, you can see that it's not perfect, right? It's a bit rounded, it's not perfect. But you do want to make sure that your slice is perfect. Now I'm going to be wrapping everything at 90 degrees. When you're doing any type of roller wrap, but especially perms, you need to have consistency. So if I'm wrapping at 90, I'm wrapping the whole head at 90. Now when I do perm wraps, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can see I have some different lengths here in the front because she does have some fringe happening. When you have different lengths, it's a good idea to do a double end wrap. So we're gonna have a piece of paper behind, a piece of paper in front, and then you're gonna soak it. I wanna do this at 90 degrees. I don't wanna hold it here, and I'm not doing it 90 degrees from this section. I'm doing it 90 degrees from this front section right here. So I'm gonna pull that paper out. You wanna make sure that your paper is up beyond the ends of the hair. We're gonna wrap the paper first. When you wrap the paper first, you're gonna prevent any fish hooks, those crazy ends, from happening. Now, once I get a grip on that, I'm going to give it a couple of rotations, and it still feels good. Sometimes as you get wrapping, you'll feel that one side is tighter than the other. If that happens, I'm going to show you what to do in the next rod. As I bring this down, you can see that it's resting half on its base. So it's not way up here, it's not high on its base, it's not way down here. It's actually half, so it's sitting right on that part line. Now, when you wrap, the elastic becomes twisted. You want to release that, because if you put a twisted elastic over top of the rod, it can cause additional tension, which can cause breakage once the chemical goes on there. I'm going to take this, I'm going to anchor it right across. Now elastics is the other thing you need to be cautious of. When you put your elastic over the top, it should rest over the top. So what that means is I'm about a ½ inch away from the scalp. I don't want to have my elastic way in here like this. When it's way in there like that, it lifts my rod and it puts way too much tension in at the root. So once I have a chemical on there, and the chemical is swelling the cuticle, there's no room for it to swell. So what's gonna happen? It's gonna break. We don't want breakage when we're doing perms. You wanna keep the elastic right across the top, about a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch away from the scalp. I'm gonna do one more rod, and I'm gonna show you a little trick that I do when I change directions. So notice the size of my section is approximately the same size as the rod that I've chosen to use. So I'm gonna do a slight weave section or a zigzag section. What that's gonna do is this section's coming forward, this section's gonna go back. But to cause a nice blend to happen, I'm actually gonna weave out the section. So I'm holding the section that I'm gonna wrap in my hand, and then I'm just going to gently do a little zigzag through that section. When you pick it up, it looks like a mess, but it's not. You pinch it, when your fingers touch the comb, that goes back, that goes forward, and you've got a perfect little zigzag. Okay, so it didn't really affect the size of my section, but I do have a bit of a weave going there, and that weave is really important to make sure that I don't have major differences or a big dip in the middle of my head. I usually put the rod below my finger. I just find that this is easier. I put it below my finger, and then I can just wrap it around. Now I am going to show you what happens when you do it at the wrong angle. So let's say I do it back here. So I hold it back here and I wrap, 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 wrap. So now my rod is bouncing off of the base. It's sitting up high on its base. Now, when you do rollers, you want maximum volume. So this would be what you would want. But for a perm wrap, usually that's not what you want. Usually for a perm wrap, keeping it at 90 degrees is your safest option. It gives you a good amount of volume without a whole lot of tension. Now I'm going to show you what happens when one side is looser than the other. So I'm going to make this bad tension here for a sec. So you can see when I hold up my rod, I'm holding it straight. I'm holding the rod straight. This piece of hair here is nice and tight, and this one isn't. So somewhere along the line when I was wrapping, I lost my tension. Here's how you fix it. Just unroll it. You're gonna pull up on the side that's really tight. Now I'm holding it straight, and it's the same on both sides. I'm gonna adjust it so that I'm wrapping at 90 degrees, and I'm gonna roll down. Some people find that it's easier to sway the rod back and forth as they bring it down, and that this helps with tension. If it does, then do it. If it doesn't, then don't. I'm gonna release my elastic so that there's no tension there. I'm gonna bring it across the top, and I'm just gonna adjust it so that I'm not too close to the scalp and I'm not too far away. And as you can see, I'm right on that part line. So I'm halfway on my base and I'm half off of my base, always wrapping from the section that's closest to me at 90 degrees. So now I'm gonna flip and I'm gonna start doing the back. Now I'm gonna be going down the head. So I have my 2 rods that are going forward, and now I'm gonna do the rest of my rods going back. As you can see, my line is pretty straight there, which means I'm out of that fringe area where I had done some texturizing. So now I'm going to show you, instead of a double paper wrap, I'm actually going to show you a single paper wrap, which is a bookend wrap. So I'm only using 1 paper. So my paper already has a little fold in it, so it folds over quite nicely. And you're going to put it right over your section. I'm going to wet it really good. And then I'm gonna pull nice and tight so I've got really good tension. Always making sure that the paper comes up past the ends of the hair. With the bookend wrap, be really careful that you don't bunch all the hair in the center of the paper. So in this case, it's distributed right across the paper, which is exactly what I want. So remember, I'm 90 degrees from this section right here that's closest to me. I place my rod under my finger, I wrap it around. I'm gonna just adjust it so that I have good tension. When I look at that hair, I can see that everything is being pulled exactly the same, so my tension is good. And I'm just gonna wrap it all the way down, so that when it falls half on its base and half off of its base. So now I'm at a spot where I see a lot of mistakes happen. There's usually a big gap through here. So what happens is the head is round and we're trying to wrap it the same way that we did on the top. It's going to be important that you adjust a few things. One, I would recommend that you tilt the head slightly forward. So right now I have it slightly back so that I could get a good eye on all that. Now I'm going to move my client. Now I can see a little bit better, so I can see where that spot is. I find if you keep the head in the same position the whole time, you're going to end up taking the wrong size section. What will happen is we tend to hold the hair here instead of here. Okay, so I'm going to show you what happens when we do that. So I'm holding it here, which is the wrong place to hold it. I got my tension just about. Rod goes in, paper goes over. Now, when I wrap that, it's actually laying on its base. So take a look at the bases. So here they're all half on, half off, but this one, it's actually sitting on top of the base. So my base is right here, clearly exposed. That's not what we want for this wrap. It should be resting right about here to match the other rods. So let's take this out. So we want to wrap 90 degrees from the section that's closest to us, not from here, but from here. There. Now it's right where it's meant to be, half on and half off of its base. So this can continue to happen as you move down the head because the head is round. So just keep an eye on where you're actually holding the rod. And it's quite possible if you're ending up with those gaps, one of two things is happening. So either your sections are too big. This usually happens because you can't see where you're sectioning, so you need to adjust your client's head, or you're holding the hair here instead of here. So you need to make sure that you're holding it 90 degrees from the part that's closest to you. If you can keep your same length rod the whole way down, it definitely makes things easier when you get to the sides. So I would recommend using your full length ones all through the back, and then if you do need your half size ones, you can stick them in on the sides. If you do half in this back panel, what'll happen is sometimes this side panel will become too big and it will be really hard to adjust once you're there. However, you can change the color of your rod. So as long as it makes sense. So I'm switching into some white, which are a little bit smaller. And this is common to do when you're doing perm wraps, changing up the size of the rod, especially as you get down to the nape. Again, you want to be able to see the section that you're taking. If you can't see what you're slicing, it could be way too big and you don't understand why you have all these gaps. So just make sure you can always see your section. Okay, final rod in the back. We take a look, we can see that everything is resting half on and half off of its base. And we can tell if everything has good tension. So if I had a rod for, let's take this one, and let's twist it a little bit. Okay, we've twisted it. We can see that it's not resting the same as all of the other ones. So this is an indication that the tension is wrong. So you're gonna wanna go back and you wanna grab that rod, which I totally just mangled. There we go. And we're gonna adjust it. Usually it's just the elastic that you have to adjust. If it's twisted, it's probably just tighter on one side than the other. All right, the head goes back up, and now we're going to work on this side section. So because I use the full length rods the whole way down, and because I have a diagonal parting here, the widest part of this section is still going to accommodate a regular size rod. Now for our board exam, we are allowed one vertical rod, but if I don't have to use it, I don't like to use it. I like to keep everything nice and neat and all the same. So this very first section at the top, again, can be a real issue. You still want to make sure that you're cutting your lines straight across. It is going to be a triangle, and usually what I tell my students to do is leave it until the end. So we're going to just tuck that out of the way. By leaving it until the end, it just makes it easier to get all the other rods in. You want to stand directly in front of your section still. The size of your section is the same size as your rod. Now I am going to show you another thing that can happen sometimes, and that's when you put the rod on top instead of underneath. I have had it happen where a student will put the rod on the top and they actually wrap the rod away from them because it feels easier to do. They take their elastic and they put it right where I told them to, about a ½ inch from the scalp. And what happens? The rods are falling out. And then I get the question, Amy, why are my rods falling out? Well, it's because the rod was placed on top and rolled away from you instead of putting it underneath and rolling it toward you. So make sure that your rods, you're always wrapping them toward you. So getting this first section right is important because if you start doing it at a diagonal, then it's going to throw off all the rest of your sections. So if you start on a nice clean horizontal line, then everything else will fall into place nicely. Now this one, because it's hitting these other rods here, I'm actually going to switch that out to a ½ size rod. It lays really nicely. It's not bumping into any of my other rods. It's not getting in the way. So those first couple of rods, you can do them at a ½ size. Okay, my full size one fits in really nicely there. It's not bumping or interfering with any of my other rods. So that fits well, and we'll keep going with those. Now the head is round this way as well. So you may want to take a slight step in either this direction or this direction, depending if you feel like your tension's a little bit off. I feel like on this rod, I'm a little bit looser on this side. So I'm actually gonna just take a ½ of a step this way to my left. And I'm gonna just try to correct that. So I'm right in the center of the head as opposed to off to one side. This is a little bit tricky because the head, again, it's round. So in all different directions. This is going to be my last full-size rod, and then the rest we're going to switch to the ½ size. And because I used white in the nape on this side, I'm actually going to use the ½ size white on this side. So you can see that this section is quite a bit smaller than up through here, and it is because the hairline narrows out through there. So using a ½ size rod is what you got to do. Now I am going to just take a ½ step to my right. I'm actually going to do a double paper through here, double end wrap. Because there are some just texturized pieces through there that aren't quite catching. This can make it a little bit bulkier on a ½ rod, but you do want to make sure that all of your ends are secure. Okay, last rod at the nape. Now for this last section, and this is a section you have to make sure you're slicing horizontally and not diagonally. It's so easy just to want to follow this line that's because of the shape of the head and do a diagonal section, but you do want to make sure that you're keeping it nice and straight. So by doing a straight line there, it is going to make the first section, same thing here, it's not going to be an exact rectangle, and that's okay. All right, so I've run out of purple. I'm moving on to my orange rod. So I was able to take my section here a little bit bigger. Again, keeping it at 90 degrees. I don't want it up here. I want it right about there. And I do want to stand in front of my section. So be careful that you're not standing over here and that you're not standing over here too far. Your rods aren't going to lay nice and straight the way that you want them. I've flipped back to the double flat wrap because I am at the hairline, and at the hairline there tends to be different lengths just because of texturizing. Okay, so now I can go back and I can take this last little piece, this corner piece, and I'm gonna use a bookend wrap because it's just a small little piece and a ½ size rod. And we're gonna put that in there, and then the perm wrap is done. Doing a perm wrap is probably, no, it definitely is the one thing that is hated by all students. It is just because it takes so much patience, it takes so much practice, it's just tedious to do. It's not a hard skill to do, it's just, it requires some patience. So if you're struggling with patience, You're not alone. We're all in the same boat. Even me, there's times I go in and I'm like, shoot, my section was too big, my section was too small, and I have to readjust. If your sectioning is done properly right from the beginning though, if you can just double check it and make sure, take your rods and double check those sizes, it's gonna save you a lot of frustration from having to rip rods out halfway through the perm wrap, because that's not fun. Remember too, the head moves, the chair goes up and down. You don't have to be maneuvering all over the place and guessing where you're sectioning. Move the chair up and down. Ask your client to tilt their head forward or to lean back a little bit. They're only sitting in your chair for a short amount of time. You have to do this daily. So keeping your ergonomics good is really important, but it is also going to help you to be accurate in the end. Until next time, thanks for watching and have a great hair day.